Hi, I'm Jill Klein Matthiasson.
Steve Matthiason, Matthiason Family Vineyards, small family winery here in Napa, California. We're standing in a new vineyard that we planted 6 years ago. We planted this vineyard to adapt to climate change. So you can see the trellis goes inward like this. It's a big V, so the fruit hides underneath here in the shade of the leaves. That really helps with the heat. Also, the fruit is higher up from the ground, about 18 inches higher from the ground, so it doesn't pick up as much heat from the soil at night, maintaining more freshness, more acidity, aromatics. Our fertilizer down here is compost, so everything is fertilized with compost, certified organic vineyard, rather than using synthetic fertilizers. Those release carbon into the atmosphere, whereas the compost is diverting the waste stream from landfills, and we're able to use that to positive benefit here in the vineyard. It also improves the wine quality because it's slow release and the roots can just sort of slowly work at it. Down in the middle of the rows, all these grasses that look dry are actually California native grasses. These are adapted to our Mediterranean climate. So they're not dead right now, they're dormant, they're very much alive. The roots go down 6 to 8 feet into the ground, and as soon as we get rainfall this fall, they'll green up and they'll come back to life again, and they'll sequester carbon from the atmosphere and bury it deep down into the soil. So these are different varieties that we planted experimentally to see what would do well with climate change. And so we have some Sagrantino, we have a variety that was bred by Hill Lomo at UC Davis for warm climate. We have some Petite Syrah, which normally wouldn't be grown down here in the Oak Knoll district. So we're going to walk over to the other side of the farm and look at some of the habitat. A healthy farm has biological diversity, generates its own pest management, and so there's a lot that can be done with native plants to create habitat for beneficial insects. Here you can see more of the native grasses. You can see where they get a little bit of water from irrigation leaks, they green up, and that's what the whole vineyard will look like and hopefully we get some nice fall rains in another couple months. So these plows are called disc harrows. They're all parked now because we've transformed all our vineyards to no-till farming so that we reduce our carbon footprint. So we're not cultivating the vineyards anymore, we're just mowing them. And so this farm edge here this is a hedgerow, so we refer to this as farmscaping. This stream here, when we purchased this property, this was a barren ditch sprayed on both sides with Roundup. We received a grant in 2008 and planted and vegetated it with California natives on both sides. So now it has wildlife habitat, beneficial insect habitat for pollinators. If you look here, we have the bird boxes and raptor perches. It's full of quail. And these native plants are selected to flower sequentially, one after the other. So 12 months out of the year, something's flowering, keeping all the native beneficial insects around and allowing them to have the nectar and pollen they need, that then they can move into the vineyard and eat the pests. So these are all systems that a lot of these systems were developed at UC Davis in the various different departments, and it's a question of applying that here in this property and really pushing forward into the realm of sustainability.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute and Professor of Enology. Thank you for being with us tonight for October's Sips and Bites. As you saw this evening, we were visiting with the Matthiasons, both UC Davis alumni. The RMI strives to provide you with interesting insights into food, and wine innovations by UC Davis researchers and alumni like the Matthiasons. You'll hear how their novel approach at cultivating and managing grapes, as well as their push to lower alcohol levels in their wine, has revived the classic style of wine that has become a movement amongst innovative winemakers in California, including many of our recent UC Davis winemaking alumni. A few housekeeping items to cover. We'll be taking questions. So if you have questions of our speakers, remember to submit yours by the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen. We'll be pausing to answer your questions as we go along. So please ask questions about the ongoing discussion. We'll try to answer as many of your questions as possible, and we'll also be polling you to your reaction to the wines as they're poured. Second, today's program will be available on demand, probably middle of next week. And please share that program with your friends and family. And now let's welcome our guests.
We have a surprise guest with us
This is
today.
Patches.
Okay, Jill Klein Matthiasson studied botany at the University of Pennsylvania, researched ancient farming techniques in Israel, and studied traditional methods for soil health in graduate school at UC Davis. She pioneered farmer-to-farmer networking for sustainability in the early 90s while working for a family farming nonprofit and ran programs training farmers on direct sales. She's taught cooking from the garden classes in local grade schools and served on the Napa Farmers Market Board. She runs the business side of the family farming and wine business. And she also makes killer jam, by the way. Steve Matthiason has been named Winemaker of the Year by both Food and Wine Magazine and the San Francisco Chronicle, and is co-author of the California Code of Sustainable Wine Growing. He's a sought-after viticultural consultant and has worked with many of the Napa brands you're all familiar with. This spring, he was offering our students a 4-day workshop on organic viticulture until, like everything else, we got shut down. But I did want to mention, I want to thank him for his help. So let's get started with a discussion here. And I'd like to get going by asking both of you how you got interested in farming and viticulture. And I don't know, who wants to start?
You start.
Okay. Got interested in farming when I was a kid, going to my cousin's farm in one in North Dakota, one in Manitoba.
Wow.
My parents were academics, anthropologists. So we moved down to Tucson, Arizona. I had no idea that you could farm without having been born into it. So I just sort of loved going there, but didn't, it was just sort of always this sort of thing going, wow, that would be so cool. Went to Whittier College for undergrad, studied philosophy, and just really into gardening and beer brewing and really just wanted to find some way of working in that. And then I found out about UC Davis, and I remember going, this is before the internet, going to the Noe Valley. I was in the San Francisco library and looking through the course catalog and just going, oh my God, there's an entire department called soil science, an entire department, plant pathology, viticulture and enology. And so I applied for international agricultural development and managed to get in. But got an internship working in Central Valley for a consulting company called Four Seasons Ag Consulting, which did tree fruit and grapes. Found out about, it was another big eye-opener, what's going on here in California, and fell in love with vineyards and ended up taking all the classes in the viticulture department that I could. Switched gears, and Andy Walker became my major professor, and I finished with a degree in horticulture.
All right.
Stayed with that consulting company and started a whole career. 25 years later, here we are.
Great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just kind of like this black sheep in my family, growing up in the city, like no connection to agriculture or any kind of like, we had grew tomatoes and zucchini in a backyard, like, a few summers, but that was about it. And for some crazy reason, I was in college and had this idea that I wanted to study agriculture, and ended up after college working in Israel on these ancient agricultural systems. But one interesting thing about that is at the time that I was there, they were rediscovering all the crops that were being grown, but they just recently discovered that they were also growing grapes and making wine in that same area that I was working. And we, so that's kind of fun, sort of like brought my two interests together. And then ended up also going to Davis for my master's in international agricultural development, but ended up doing a research project on cover crops in California agriculture. I got funding from the California Energy Commission to look at the energy use of cover crops versus for nitrogen as fertilizer instead of using nitrogen fertilizer. And it turns out it's a lot more energy efficient to get your nitrogen from cover crops. And that was sort of the path I was going on, and ended up graduating and getting a job working for the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And I was there for several years, working around the state on these farmer to farmer information sharing, educating farmers about reducing pesticide use around the state and working on direct marketing. And then when I met Steve, Steve was getting in the viticulture department, and he would bring grapes home from the student vineyard, and we would make wine in our backyard in our garage. They're not allowed to do that anymore, but
yeah.
Then it was
Muscat of Hamburg from the student vineyard was the first wine we ever made.
Yeah. And really, I had no exposure or very little exposure to wine growing up, or really didn't know very much. But really, we started dating in like August, and September we made our first wines together, and we just finished our 26th harvest together. So,
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a while. And, you know, we really sort of started making wine. The home wine just grew and grew over the years, the home winemaking kind of hobby. And then we started Matthiason kind of as a little bit of an extension of a hobby. And here we are, you know, we started in 2003. Here we are 17 years later, crazy enough to think that, you know, sitting in front of a bunch of other UC Davis folks talking about our wines. So.
Well, I have to add you to the list of the many couples who met at UC Davis. It seems to be a nexus here of people running into each other that have common interests. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about what you mentioned in the video is your adaptation of your vineyard to the anticipated climate change, or climate change that's already happening. I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more about the kind of things you're doing, maybe the techniques you're using, or I don't know, I mean, because there's various kinds of adaptation. You could change what you grow, or you change the way you grow. I suppose you're doing both of those things, right?
Mm-hmm. Both of those things, and because it's twofold, right? We need to change how we do things to adapt to climate change, but we also need to be a responsible business and try to do our best to prevent climate change, and, you know, right. Think globally, act locally kind of concept. So cover cropping, you know, we converted all our vineyards to no-till. I mentioned that, I think, in the video. I don't know if I mentioned it was all the vineyards are no-till now with perennial grasses to try to sequester carbon. We're reducing our tractor passes. Mm-hmm. We're trying on the winery side, you know, we're trying to reduce energy use in the winery. We're trying to reduce the weight of our packaging. You know, so when we ship our wine, the glass is heavy, obviously, and so the lighter glass. There was a fad towards thicker, heavier, showier glass, and we've tried to move back to lighter glass. We've tried to, you know, we've changed where our glass is made, so it's locally made here in California, so our empty glass isn't moving across, and it's not a coal-powered plant; it's a natural gas-powered plant. You know, you can get really deep into these little micro things that actually have an impact on the business. Mm-hmm. Right. So that's on that side. Then on the adaptation side, it's really root stocks, deeper rooted, more drought tolerant root stocks. It's changing irrigation so that you're encouraging deeper roots. It's we actually think that the organic farming actually helps the plant quite a bit with resiliency for heat spikes, just due to the deeper and more robust root system, and the plants have to fend for themselves more with the way we fertilize and water. The trellising, so it's basically, you know, we've changed our trellising so that we have more leash cover over the fruit, and also changing our wine sort of style expectations, and because ironically, as the weather's getting warmer, it advances the sugar ripeness. And so we're finding ourselves but picking earlier to maintain freshness before acidity um, falls away, and aromatics become darker, jammier, riper aromatics. And sugar, it surprisingly then is lower than it used to be when we were looking for fuller bodied wines. And so our alcohols, as the weather is getting warmer, are actually going down, not up, as we're sort of kind of adapting our wine style and looking for more freshness and wine that's, you know, more and more suited to like Mediterranean outdoor backyard dining, and not so much steakhouse dining in a, you know, cold northeastern US kind of thing.
So Jill, are you, what's it like selling these wines? Because they're kind of, I would say, completely counter to the market, but, you know, quite different from what the market has been for the last, I don't know, 20 years, really.
I mean, it was really a struggle when we started. You know, we started in the era of the 100-point scores from Robert Parker and Wine Spectator, and they were big, rich, ripe wines, and people would charge hundreds of dollars and sell out in like no time of these very expensive, high alcohol, kind of those style that you're talking about, the jammier flavors, the oakier texture and more texture. But you know, and so it was a real challenge, and we were small. We were, you know, kind of reaching out to different avenues to try to sell our wine. We started emailing samples or sending samples, reaching out to wine bloggers and sending samples to wine bloggers, because we knew our wines would never get the big scores and be written about in the major wine publications. And that was when wine blogging was just getting going, if you can imagine. And so we kind of caught the attention, you know, of the wine bloggers, and they started writing about us. And then some of the wine writers started writing about us, because at the time, at a place like Chez Panisse in Berkeley, which was, you know, known to be farm to table and had their own like full-time person, a position called the forager, where they try to source all the fresh produce from, you know, 100-mile radius or something like that from where the restaurant was. But at the same time, most of the wines on their list were from France. And so they were, you know, so we were kind of the local, you know, equivalent to wines that could go well with those types of foods. So that started sort of catching people's attention as the farm to table movement started growing out of California and across the country. You know, our wines were really better suited to that type of food that was being made, you know. And so and then a little bit of recognition in the press, and some of the accolades started kind of rolling in with, you know, this different style of wine that we were coming out. Yeah.
So it tells you that sometimes it takes a few years to convince everyone that you've got a good idea, right?
Yeah, 10 years.
Right. Yeah.
We can attest to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're still trying to convince some people, but enough people have figured it out.
Yeah, I mean, I would put your wines in the category of wines that go well with food. And I guess my preference is sometimes you could have, like if you're just tasting wine, like as an appetizer or as an aperitif, sometimes you want those richer, heavier wines. But with food, those usually don't work. So I think there's a place for both styles.
Absolutely. That's the beauty of it. There are 700 wineries in Napa. So there's room for a lot of difference, and that's the beauty of it, you know. So people can find that, you know, to come here and discover. And you know, and we don't, and with our style of wine, we don't have a lot of competition. We've really pushed, you know, carved out this niche of wines with a lot of flavor, but they bring a lightness to your evening when you drink them.
Yeah. So speaking of lighter wines, do you want to start with your first wine?
You bet. This is a Chardonnay. If everybody wants to put that in their glass, if they haven't already, from the Linda Vista Vineyard.
I'll go get mine.
Oh yeah. So the Linda Vista Vineyard, we're in the southern part of the Napa Valley, between the town of Napa and Yountville, closer to the San Pablo Bay. I think some of you are from the kind of Davis area, Bay Area, and then there's probably some people from other parts of the country on today. But we get the cooling effect from the if you've been to San Francisco in the summer, you know it's cold and foggy. We get that influence of that cold, foggy San Francisco weather. Not as much, but we'll get, especially starting in July and into August, cool, foggy nights and mornings, and then warm, sunny days. And the cool, foggy nights really help develop the flavors and hold the acid, and then the warm, sunny days ripen the grapes and develop the sugars. What else do you want to say about this?
So this corner of Napa, most of Napa Valley are volcanic. The Vaca Mountains are mostly volcanic. I think pretty much entirely volcanic. On the Mayacamas behind us are also the north part are volcanic, but the south part, Mount Veeder, there are a lot of marine soils, marine sediments that got shoved up as part of the plate tectonics activity. And so where we're located, our soils are actually marine soils, which is pretty unusual for Napa and for a lot of Sonoma as well. We're in the wine growing regions. And so the minerals in the soil are very high in magnesium, low in potassium, the grapes hold their acidity because we're very low in potassium for the Davis chemistry nerds. And there's a lot of water holding capacity, and so the grapes, the vines make a lot of acid as well. Big lush green leaves. That we don't have a lot of water stress in this vineyard season long, even though we don't irrigate it at all. So it really lends itself, between the climate Jill described and the soils, to just a very bright, crisp, very clean and refreshing Chardonnay. It's sort of the polar opposite of what one might expect with the California Chardonnay, but it's very true to this corner of Napa Valley. I mean, the farming and winemaking is pretty minimal, and it's very much, this is what this site produces.
And when Steve talks, and when we both talk about acidity, that kind of gives that citrusy, bright, zingy character to wine. That's what we call acidity. And the vineyard is the Linda Vista vineyard. So right behind us is our home vineyard. Our house is right in front of us. We're just looking at it. And then behind our home vineyard is our neighbor's vineyard, the Linda Vista vineyard. And we've been farming that vineyard. We leased that vineyard from the owners, and we've been farming it since 2011. So this was our 10th year farming it, and it had been farmed by kind of a big management company and hadn't been really well loved. And so when we took it over, it had really been depleted. The soil was depleted. We started planting cover crops. Steve's viticultural magic. We have really seen a transformation of the vineyard over the 10 years that we're farming, and both the quality of the vineyard, the quality of the grapes, the life in the soil. It's just very rewarding to see the transformation that's happened over the last 10 years of that vineyard.
It was planted back in the 1980s.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And then the wine is made in, it's barrel fermented in all old French oak. So there's no new oak on here. So you might get a little hint of oak. And it's pretty straightforward.
So we have a question here. Has it gone through ML?
About half of it.
Maybe you want to describe a little bit what ML is.
Yeah, so ML is a secondary bacterial fermentation. The bacteria eat malic acid and convert it to lactic acid, which is softer and less tart. And they change the flavors a little bit too. And so we like a little bit of that character in the Chardonnay. It softens the Chardonnay and it adds complexity, but we like to keep the initial brightness and purity of the fruit. So we allow about half the barrels to go through ML, and about half of them we prevent it so that they stay fresh and crisp, and then it's blended together before we bottle.
So just to step back for people, one really quick, that for So there's two fermentations that wine can go through. For those of you who don't know, the first fermentation all wines have to go through. It's a yeast fermentation that converts the sugars in the grape juice into alcohol. And then there's this secondary fermentation, which is this bacterial fermentation, called malolactic fermentation. Almost all red wines go through that fermentation, and it's a stylistic choice on the part of the winemaker about the white wines and whether they're going to go through that secondary fermentation.
All right, so we're going to do a poll of our audience. So we have four terms here that possibly describe the Chardonnay that you're tasting. So those of you who actually have it in your hands, please vote for the aroma that you find dominant in the wine you're tasting. And if you don't see your favorite term there, then put in the Q&A, drop in a descriptor of what you're smelling. And we'll be doing this with the other wines as well. So we have our votes coming in. It looks like they're pretty evenly distributed right now. So we'll wait another few seconds here. We're getting a number of questions about the wildfires, and I don't know if we want to go into that now or maybe in a few minutes. So it looks like we've got our votes in here, and it looks like Green Apple is the winner. But we have quite a few votes for all the other terms as well. So let's see. Here we go. I hope everybody can see that now.
Look at that.
That's fun.
All right. Do you want to make any other comments about the wine, or shall we move on?
For this wine, I don't think so. The alcohol, if you look at the alcohol on the back of the labels of all three of these wines, I think, you know, if you're used to looking at the alcohol levels of wines, these are a little lower than what you might find typically for California wines. And that's actually very important to us, that, you know, these wines are part of a healthy diet, healthy lifestyle. And we think, you know, moderate alcohol, these are classic old school alcohol levels are really important for that. And so, you know, the idea is that you can drink the wine and hopefully at the end of your meal, decide what you're going to do for the rest of the evening, as opposed to staggering into the couch and crashing. And so maybe just if you take note of how the wine, because that changes the weight of the wine. The alcohol makes the wine kind of thicker, heavier. And so if you, on the palate, kind of take note of that, but also at the end of this tonight, it'd be interesting to see how you feel and how in your energy level, because, you know, sometimes we forget that wine's a beverage that we consume. And so how it makes us feel is really important.
And just, there's probably a range of knowledge of participants on wine. And so I'm just gonna kind of speak to some people who maybe have less knowledge. Just that the amount of alcohol that's in the final wine is determined by how much sugar is in the grapes. So when I was saying that the yeast converts the sugars into alcohol, the more sugars that are in the grapes, the more alcohol there will be in the wine. And the riper the grapes get, the more sugar they'll accumulate. So that's part of what Steve was talking about picking earlier. Part of that is that we'll get lower sugars in the grapes and we'll get less alcohol in the wine.
Yeah.
So before we move on, there was one question about what are you smelling in the wines? What's the right answer to the poll?
All four.
All four. those are the four. Well, we don't want to give away our system, but in this particular case, those four were what we think of as really key flavor descriptors for our Chardonnay.
I think green apple is very prevalent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on a little bit.
We can talk about the fires for a minute.
Yeah. Why don't you talk about what you had? Did you have to deal with fires, or the fire? I don't think the fire came close to your property, did it? Or
no, we had to host a few evacuees, but in terms of, for us personally, that was really the extent of it. Other than we had, you know, a lot of health and safety concerns for our employees, and so there was a lot of, you know, trying to decide, is it safe to work? You know,
we had really bad air quality.
Yeah, the air quality,
which all of Northern California had, but
Yeah.
so we were working outside, but we had fully harvested before
Yeah.
the second fire, the most recent glass fire. And we were at the end of our like cellar work and fermentation. So we were really lucky about that. But then it was because most of the grapes that were still on the vine were damaged by the smoke and aren't usable. They're saying something like up to 80% of the Cabernet crop is not going to be harvested this year in Napa, which is a huge and a big part of our economy. So, but luckily the fires were to the north of us. St. Helena North is really what got impacted. But we definitely have friends who lost their wineries and their homes. So it's very sad for us in this valley, and we're really heavy-hearted about the devastation.
I wanted to ask you one other question about your farming practices, and that is I know you, I know Steve actually reads journal articles, which not every viticulturalist does. And Jill studied soil science, and I think the last few years, I'm in the enology side. I'm a chemist that study wine chemistry, but I hear more and more about interest in the soil microbiome, right? Well, what are the bugs in the soil? And I believe that that's very important to soil health and perhaps a part of your farming philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Well, it really is. And we have a problem because, speaking of journal articles, we have a deficit of information on the microbiome effect in wine grapes as for wine quality or plant adaptation to stress. But in other crops, there's some good research. And so if you extrapolate over, I think that it doesn't take a lot. It's not a big stretch to accept that microbiome is important. When we went in school, we talked about the rhizosphere, the area around the outside of the root, and there's all kind of stuff it does, just like in our stomachs. I mean, signaling the little bacteria, signaling the root and helping them with their immune system, or alerting them to pests or to water deficit. And so we sort of have assimilated what we can from the science and try to apply that in vineyards, and we think there's something there, but we would really like to see, you wouldn't be a UC Davis graduate if you didn't say more research is necessary before I can make a definitive statement. But yeah, but it's that we think that there's something there, and it's a big deal for us.
Yeah, and it's something we've been kind of in the organic farming world for over 30 years now. I mean, for Steve and I, and it's, practice like adding compost. Compost is full of the microbial life. Then you add that and jumpstart the kind of microbial life in the soil, and then growing your own carbon source with cover crops that the microbes can feed on. That's a kind of long time organic farming practice that we really see the benefit of. That's where we really see like that, the Linda Vista Vineyard and the transformation over the years, the health of the soil, and the healthier the soil, the healthier the plant, and then you're like growing your own sort of pest management through that method.
Yeah, the old organic farming credo is feed the soil, not the plants. So over time, you really see with the vineyards when you follow that practice. Petiole samples, those are the samples we send into the piece of the leaf that we send into the laboratory to like see what fertilizers the plants need. They just start to level out over a period of a few years, and pretty soon the vines are just fine, basically. So in our own vineyards, I don't even send anything into the lab anymore, because we just keep our cover crops going. We apply compost when the vines are weak. If they're strong, they don't need any compost, and it just kind of starts working itself out. And it's really actually surprisingly simple, actually.
So if someone's asking, what type of cover crops do you actually use?
Well, so cover crops are one of the most important viticultural tools for wine quality, on top of any kind of environmental benefits. And the reason is that the biggest determiner of wine quality in a given year is the plant water status. So how much availability to moisture does the plant have when the fruit's developing. And with cover crops, we can work with the seasons, and on a wet spring, we can leave our cover crop longer and use more of the water and vent more of the water up into the air, so the grapevines have water stress earlier. On a dry spring, we can mow our cover crop down or till it in earlier to save more moisture for the plants. And so the cover crop is our one tool that we have to sort of guide that plant into that sweet spot, because the art of viticulture is you're a personal trainer for the grapevine. So we want to keep the grapevine at the gym 3 times a week and eating right. And so you have to identify vineyards and you say, okay, this vineyard needs to go on a diet, this vineyard needs to eat more. And so cover crops are one of our main tools for being able to control the water side of that. Mm-hmm. And we have other tools, pruning, we can decide how much we want to let the vine grow or not grow. We can fertilize with compost or not, but cover crops are a huge tool for us. So that said, therefore, typically, if we're just totally focused on wine quality, we use a wide range of cover crops. We use ones with lots of beans and peas that we can till into the soil, and when they break down, they'll feed nitrogen to the plants. And then we use more grains that loosen the soil up, but they don't feed as much nitrogen. Or we use no-till cover crops that use a lot of water and are competitive with the plants. So, but now we're really focused on global warming. And so one of the best ways that is for farming, you can have positive impact on the global warming is by converting your farming to no-till, which means we're not tilling the cover crops in anymore as green manure or cultivating them at all. We're planting perennial grasses and we're just mowing them. So we just made the decision that as in sort of environmental stewards that we would convert all of our vineyards to no-till, which means that some of our vineyards have more competition than maybe would be ideal from a viticultural perspective. So new vineyards that we're planting, we're using more drought-tolerant rootstocks than you normally would, and then coupling that with a no-till cover crop with California native grasses. Existing vineyards, we're using more compost to try to make up for the no-till, to try to find a sweet spot. So it's in balance. So it's really a work in progress for us right now to figure out how to maintain sort of wine quality and site-specific viticulture with more of a uniform no-till cover crop approach. So this is sort of our new horizon right now.
Yeah, I was hearing that if you can convince in your case the cover crop to actually produce topsoil, then you're actually pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And if every farmer did that, there would be we could have a huge impact on climate change.
Yeah, exactly. That that's one of the things. As in agriculture, we have the ability to actually have a positive impact in that regard. And so it's just a question we have to. So we're rethinking our whole farming system for how we can pull that off, basically.
Let's see. I think we should move on to wine number 2.
Yeah, for sure.
And this is your famous one.
This is a wine that you aren't going to find in very many places in Napa Valley or in California or in the whole country.
Even in the world, for that matter.
Yeah, right.
The variety
exactly.
is very rare.
So you pronounce the variety. Well, we pronounce the variety Ribolla Gialla, which is our bastardization of the Italian variety. That is from the Friuli region of Italy, which is in the far northeast corner of Italy. And the story with this variety is that when we first moved to Napa, Steve was consulting in vineyards and had a client that was really passionate about Italian wines and traveled to Italy a lot. And on one of his trips went to the Friuli region of Italy and discovered this variety, Ribolla Gialla, and fell in love with it. So he brought, I shouldn't say this, but cuttings home in his suitcase.
Not me.
That
would have been George. I told him not to.
It was a dear friend who's now passed away. And then he grafted.
Statute of limitations ends when you die, basically.
And he grafted the Ribolla Gialla into his vineyard in Napa. And Steve was had started working with him in his vineyard a couple years after that. And Steve didn't know anything about the variety, was really curious, so went on a trip to Friuli to learn more about how to grow the grape and make the wine, and really learned about this style of winemaking that is the traditional way that white wines were made for centuries, which is the same way red wine's made. So now we make white wine typically by harvesting the grapes, pressing them, and fermenting the juice separately from the skins. But this is called technically an orange wine, where we made this like a red wine. We fermented the juice in contact with the skins, and after it was done fermenting, we pressed the skins away from the juice. So you get that orange color from the contact with the skins. And then it also, when we let it age, we don't completely top the barrel, so it gets a little more oxygen, so it gets a little more orange color from that too. So that's why we call it an orange wine.
So it definitely has more color, but this is not from oak or yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's
this is
from the skin. So we're gonna have to lean on you to explain to us what's causing what compound is causing the orange color. But interestingly, for an oxidation standpoint, so orange wines can be very astringent when they're young, and I want to actually learn more about why that is. I think it's because the anthocyanin doesn't have anthocyanins. And so what we've learned is that if you make it exactly like a red wine and protect it from oxidation with sulfites, it stays very astringent. It never really softens. And so we make this without any use of sulfites and allow it to oxidize in a way that would pretty much kill a red wine. But with the Ribolla Gialla, it softens and transforms and moves into this nice sort of like full silky expression.
Well,
Oh, go ahead.
I was in Slovenia, which is quite close to that. I mean, just next door, literally. And I was being told by a winemaker there that they were making a wine in this style. And I'm afraid I can't remember the variety. But they were saying that in the old days, the monks would tell the winemakers, this is how you were supposed to make white wines. And part of the reason was they were longer lasting. In other words, in the absence of using sulfites and other hermetically sealed containers, the wines would naturally get, well, actually, they would get over-oxidized over the course of a year. But by having some skin contact, you'd have more phenolics, which would protect the wine against that oxidation. So that was the traditional way of making white wines, was to make it in this style. So it's a very, very old style of wine, older than I thought. I thought you were making classic European styles, so this is an ancient European style.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a wine archaeologist, Patrick McGovern, and we're collaborating with him on making a Retsina with Greco di Tufo made in this style, and then we're adding pine sap to it, and we're trying to replicate a Retsina that you would have had during the Roman times.
Okay, I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get the second poll up for this wine. And as you can see, the descriptors are very different from the Chardonnay, almost polar opposite. And so click on the things that you're smelling and tasting in this wine. Let's see how this goes. Let's see, you started with lots of apple compote, but now Wet Rocks is taking over and getting ahead. Looks like Wet Rocks is, it's not something I would have immediately thought of as a good descriptor of wine, but obviously it's so looks like we're done here.
When Wet Rocks really like dialed in is like specifically when the first rain, the smell that comes up off the ground after the first rain.
Yeah, so can you see that? 3/4 of our tasters thought Wet Rocks was the best descriptor.
So anyone who's been in the desert in the summer for a summer desert rain knows how awesome that smell is.
Yeah. He's from Tucson, so he knows all about it.
Okay, we've got one other question related to cover crops. Do you ever use sheep to manage your cover crops?
You know, we have, but it's nice to grow the sheep in there, but it's because it's just a kind of a neat way of growing your sheep in between the vines during the winter. We haven't had much success with them as a true management tool because the sheep are fairly picky eaters, and so they don't eat all of it. And so if you mob it with enough sheep to eat all of it and get your timing just right, it can work. But you're risking also soil compaction, because if it rains a lot and you have 150 sheep in the vineyard, they like to gather at one end of the vineyard, and so one end will get trampled down versus the other end. And so unfortunately, we haven't been able to figure out how to make sheep work, but sometimes we'll put 2 or 3 out there and just raise them over the winter, and it's really fun.
And you give them names?
One thing you never do if you're going to eat an animal is name it. Yeah, there's that part.
All right. Well, do you want to say anything else about this wine, or we'll move on?
Just that it's, in terms of food pairings, I think, I didn't mention on the Chardonnay, but the Chardonnay really goes well, with typically things like fish and salads and chicken, like a lemon chicken. One of our people on our team makes this delicious lemon chicken that goes really well with our Chardonnay. And then the food pairing for the Ribolla Gialla, I really feel it's my favorite go-to wine. It's extremely versatile. We were actually doing a cheese tasting today. We're doing a lot of virtual tastings. We ship wine directly to people and then talk about the wines. And we're trying to connect with a cheese company that can ship cheeses to go with the wine. So when we do the tastings, people can have that pairing. So we were tasting a lot of different cheeses today, and the strongest cheese tasted we paired with the Ribolla Gialla. And it's really, there's hard to pair foods. Sometimes when you have pork with a fruit sauce on it, a sweet and savory, it's really hard to find a wine that does well with that. It's really does great with that kind of combination.
Well, as we wrap up here on this wine, one of our audience said it reminds me of a Viognier.
Oh,
interesting. It has those aromatics, like it's another sort of aromatic.
And Viognier can have a texture that some people describe as oily. It has a breadth to the texture, and this due to the being fermented with the skins, it kind of has that broad texture as well. And it doesn't. And Viognier tends to be high pH. Our Ribolla is actually fairly high pH, and then when we ferment a whole cluster, that raises the pH even more.
So you in the video, you pointed out some interesting varieties you've planted, Sagrantino. I was wondering, have you planted Toraldigo, another Italian tannic variety?
Not Toraldigo, but we have Refosco and Iopatino,
which are also from the Friuli region. So this Ribolla Gialla that you'd had is from our home vineyard, the vineyard that you saw Steve and I walking through at the beginning. And then, we also have these other 2 red wine varieties from the same region that the Ribolla Gialla is from.
Yeah, in Yolo County, with a client vineyard, we planted Alianico, Montepulciano, Barbera to try to, more match to the heat. Where we are down here in Oak Knoll, it's actually a little on the cool side for those 3. And so the Northern Italian reds work better. Like Toraldigo would work really well, but so the closest we have to that is the Refosco.
So is that, I guess I was leading up to a question about where you're going with, what's the next thing at Matthiason? What's your,
okay.
It looks like you're moving in the direction of Italy, moving away from France, but is that accurate or just?
Well, we love the French varieties, obviously Chardonnay and Cabernet, but we grow a lot of Cabernet Franc. We have 2 Cabernet Franc vineyards. So we love Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre. We have those planted in Rutherford as well as in Yolo County. We purchased some Pinot Meunier grapes and Pinot Blanc, and so we just love all the varieties basically.
We drink wines from all over the world.
Yeah.
We have a wine club. We always have interesting varieties in the wine club. We like to, share our passion for, wines from all over the world with our wine club members. So we're always finding, fun, interesting things planted around California that we can make wine, usually from Steve's clients or friends of ours. So, you know, I don't know, the next thing is unknown yet.
Yeah, the Sagrantino is the idea is learn that variety, because it's for people that don't know Sagrantino, the aromatics are kind of like forest floor, forest leaves, and but it's extremely tannic.
Yeah.
And one thing is that as the nights are getting, part of global warming is our terroir is changing because our nighttime temperatures are getting warmer. Napa Valley has always been like the cold nights, warm days is a big part of our wine style. As the nights are getting warmer, the tannins are getting softer. And so the idea on the Sagrantino is that might be something down the road, 2 or 3% blending into our Cabernet to help us adapt to climate change.
You mentioned an Olmo variety, but you didn't name it. Is that Ruby Cab or
no? He never released it. So it was. So he basically, this is another statute of limitations. So Richard Ripken was a Cliff Omart's on this call. He'll remember Ripken. He passed away recently. He was a walking encyclopedia of grape history and California grape history and grapes of the world. He was a nurseryman down in Lodi, and he was one of the growing out locations for Olmo. And so Olmo had when I was working for the Lodi Wine Grape Commission in 1999, I tasted Ripken's homebrew, and he tastes the wine out of this carboy, and he says, and his whole face lights up, and he says, "You smell the pencil shavings? It's pencil, because in California pencil shavings are very elusive aroma." And he said 5% of this in a Cabernet, you'd think it was Bordeaux. And I said, "What the heck is this? Is this?" And he says, he's rattled off some number, 52.75 or something. He says, Olmo, this is one of Olmo's varieties. Olmo loved it and I loved it, but he didn't think it was commercially viable. So he told me to destroy the vines. I kept 3 of them. And so when we were replanting here at our home place, Ripken was still alive, and I asked him if he still had those 3 vines. He said he grafted them over already, but he'd check and see if there are any suckers. Sure enough, there were suckers on them, so we were able to save the budwood. It's Cabernet Sauvignon crossed with Grenache and Carignan, and it's really great.
So it needs a name, Steve.
Well, we call it Ripken.
Oh, that's a good name.
Yeah, a little homage there.
Okay. Well, I think we got to move on to our third wine here. So
right.
Third is the Cab, right?
Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. Crazy idea that we had. Really thinking outside of the box on this one. But again, not the typical style for a Napa Cabernet. You're probably starting to see a theme here as we go through these wines. To kind of understand the flavors in this wine, maybe you want to ask what your people are tasting. But the flavors on the grapevine, there's a few things a winemaker can do to influence how the wine's going to end up tasting. A lot is what happens in the vineyard. There's another factor that the winemaker really has no control over, which is the site where the grapes are grown, the terroir. And another big factor is the picking date, the day the winemaker chooses to harvest the grapes. And that's because the flavors can really change as the grapes ripen on the vine. And when the grapes first start getting ripe, you can tell that by eating one of the grapes, the seeds are getting hard and they start getting crunchy. But there's a 6-week window almost from when the time the grapes first get ripe to when the last harvest might happen. They have kind of a choice in that 6-week window, and the flavors really change in that 6-week time, and they go from more savory flavors, like minty flavors, and then get to more like pepper, red pepper and bell pepper, and then to turn into fruity flavors like red cherry, cranberry, cassis, and get to some blackberry flavors and brambly flavors, and then finally at the end of that 6-week period get more into the pruny, raisiny, cooked fruit, stewed fruit flavors. So maybe now's a good time to ask people what kind of flavors they get out of this wine.
Okay, so can we get that poll up? There we go. So we've got red cherries, marionberry, blackberries, black tea, and allspice. Nutmeg and clove.
Yeah. So when working down in Lodi, we would used to, it's fun, this is the Robert Mondavi Institute, and we used to, when Robert Mondavi was alive, he was very much a leader in a lot of respects, and one of them was in sustainability in the vineyards. And so he would invite us from Lodi, the team would invite us from Lodi to come up to field days here in Napa at Mondavi.
In-house research team.
Really great team. And so they would invite us to come up, and we would come to the, oh, here we go.
Red cherries. Yeah. And a little bit of that's fun.
Yeah, and the baking spices are in there too.
Yeah. So what's the right thing to taste here?
All of them. It's an easy test because all the answers are right. And so, but if you think about I'm going to talk about the story for Mondavi in a minute, but if you look at these 5 flavors, you think about wine balance, and so much about wine balance, people think about the effect on the palate: acidity, tannin, alcohol, sweetness, bitterness, those sort of things. But so much of the way of all of those flavors are biased by the way we think of what we're going to taste based on aromatics. And that's a part of wine balance that is not talked about enough in the world of wine. And so our philosophy on all of our red wines is that the core of the wine for a truly balanced wine are the red fruits. Not when the core are black fruits, then the wine comes off as heavy. When the core are red fruits, the wine comes off as brighter and more vibrant. But complexity is really important in wine. And so the red fruits are framed with the black fruits and framed with their herbal savory component. Savory just meaning non-fruity, basically. And so the cherries are the core of this wine, with the marionberries, blackberries as the ripe component to give you richness, and the black tea gives you freshness and vibrancy. There might be some cedar in there as well. And then the spices are more of just a mouth-watering stimulation, because good wine should be intellectual also, and should question you, and should also cause you to second guess it, to go back and when you taste the wine and say, that's different than what I thought I just tasted before. And that's part of the fun of drinking wine is it kind of messing with your mind a little bit and going back to the bottle over the course of your meal and discovering new things, or deciding that you disagree, or now you agree again with the person you're drinking it with, and talking about it. And so this it's always nice to have a spice component, and that's part of the complexity is that it evolves, and it also, there's a limit to how much you can taste at one time, just bandwidth wise. And so you come back to it and you pick out different things as you're drinking it over the course of the evening. That's why we don't believe in like blind tastings, and the whole scoring system is ridiculous, because you can't get a wine in one taste. You need to be with the wine for the evening. And that's sort of the big part of the entertainment of the wine is checking it out as the evening goes by. And then you have the rest of your bottle, you try it again tomorrow, and it'll be different tomorrow. It'll be softer and fruitier and have a whole nother side of its personality the next day.
Love that philosophy. So you were going to continue a story. I'm sorry we interrupted.
Yeah, so we would go up to have meetings at Mondavi, and Cliff and we came up from Lodi, and at the end of the meeting they asked us if we wanted to come into and taste some wines. Heck yeah, we do. And so we went into the reserve room and tried the reserve Napa Valley Cabernet, and this was in the 90s. And so it was the first, even though at this point I graduated from Davis in horticulture, so I didn't take any enology classes, and I'd worked in plenty of restaurants as a dishwasher, but not in any kind of wine buying capacity. And then we were in the Central Valley working in agriculture. So it was the first time that I had a world-class wine, was that Mondavi Reserve Cabernet. And it really blew me away, actually. And so that memory is what we chase with, so this Cabernet is really heavily inspired by that like experience of trying this incredibly complex, deep, fantastic Cabernet that was from the early 90s, which was really a turning point in California Cabernet from before they got predominantly so heavy, basically, when Cabernet was still very much about food and brightness and had a red fruit core. And so there's because the style of Cabernet making has changed every decade through its history here in California, and that early 90s is really we think that's a sweet spot for Napa Cab, and that's sort of what we're chasing.
Right. And I would say that, how would you compare your style, just to pick a name at random, with Kathy Corazon?
For a current present day winemaker, Kathy is definitely, she's a friend of ours. They're really and also an inspiration.
I think she's always maintained that style.
Yep.
She didn't drift off into the richer, riper styles that were popular for a while. So, yeah. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up here. So I just want to ask if you had any closing comments before we head off.
I just want to thank you all for joining in. It's really fun, and Andy for inviting us to be part of this. As Davis alumni, it's really fun to, connect. Steve's really involved still with a lot of the professors in viticulture and doing some projects, and so am I. And so it's great to keep that connection going.
Yeah, it was really, it's some of the, it's been a great part of our life all of this time when we were students and then continuing. I mean, it's really a big part of us. So thank you.
It's part of our origin story.
And continue, it continues, the relationships continue.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also want to thank you for maintaining that connection and your support of our students and our program over the years. You're one of our friends in Napa Valley, and we're glad to have you here tonight.
And thank you all for joining in, everybody who jumped in.
Thank you all for being here tonight. So I'm going to bid you farewell, and I'll close out the program. But thank you so much for entertainment tonight, the wonderful wines and the good stories about especially I love the Ribolla Gialla. It's a fabulous wine.
All right, thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Right. Bye-bye. Well, we hope you and your friends enjoyed tonight's program and the tasty wines that Matthiason's poured. Sips and Bites was created to offer you educational and enlightening programs. We want to hear from you, so please take a moment to share your feedback and program ideas at the end of the show when you receive a follow-up message from us. We have several upcoming lectures, all virtual and free. You can register at the RMI website. On November 10, we have a Savor lecture on how viticulture will be able to adapt to climate change with Assistant Professor Elizabeth Forrestal, Dan Petrosky, winemaker at Larkmead in Napa, and Esther Mobley from the San Francisco Chronicle, the wine writer there. About a week later, on November 18th, our next Sips and Bites will delve into spirits with the UC alumni at the J.J. Pfister Distillery in Sacramento. We will taste their wonderful pear brandy and create, with your assistance, if you get the brandy, a pear brandy cocktail that you can make at home. And finally, in December, we'll have our last Sips and Bites of 2020. We'll meet with a UCD alum who bakes bread in San Francisco and chat with a UC Davis professor of integrative medicine who will explain how healthy bread can be. Thanks again for watching, and keep in touch with our Facebook page, and good night.